Marvel. Start to create Hydra. Chapter 31. Doorway to the archive room on the 5th floor. Two figures quickly pushed the door out, just in time to meet Clark, who had just arrived at the door. It's you. The two shouted in unison. After shouting, they looked at each other in surprise. You guys know each other? Carol asked. Not friends. Fury had a black face, even though his face was already black. Hi. Clark waved hello. I've been looking for you for half a day. Was it you up there just now? Fury asked him. Clark nodded. Yes, I came to you, and the guys didn't seem to be very willing, so there was a little friction between us. Fury obviously didn't believe what he said. In fact, except for Clark's original statement that he told him that he was Hydra, which he believed, Fury basically didn't believe much. This guy is full of lies. This is Fury's assessment of Clark. At this time, Carol stepped forward and stared at Clark. Who the hell are you? Why do you know these things? Also, don't say any more kind reminders, I don't believe that. I need to know your true purpose. Quote. Miss Carol, it's really sad for me to say that. Clark shook his head in disappointment. Don't you think that my eyes are full of kindness? Quote. Carol didn't smile. Fury didn't smile either. The two did not believe his nonsense at all. Also, with your fierce and evil look, and kind eyes. I'm afraid you have to go to the whole wrong first. Seeing that the two did not believe themselves at all, Clark did not care. Originally, he was just making a small joke to liven up the atmosphere. However, it seems that the two do not like his little jokes very much. Well, I do have other purposes. Clark nodded in acknowledgement. Carol had I know, look. Fury stared at him seriously. My purpose is actually very simple. Clark said, Miss Carol, I am very interested in the technology of the Kree Empire. If not, I want Miss Carol to give me specific information. Quote. Of course, if there were physical samples, it would be great. This can't be. As soon as Clark finished speaking, before Carol could respond, Fury on the side became excited. Carol, don't promise him. Fury was afraid that Carol would not realize the seriousness of the problem, so he easily agreed to the guy in front of him, so he quickly explained to her. This person is the same as those people just now, they are all from the evil organization of Hydra. Once they get advanced alien technology, this world will be dangerous. Quote. Don't worry, I won't say yes. Carol signaled Fury not to be nervous, then looked at Clark and said, I'm sorry, I can't agree to this request of yours. Quote. Miss Carol, don't refuse so quickly. Clark smiled and said, maybe it won't be long before you need my help, but if you refuse now, it won't be easy to do then. Quote. Then don't worry, I will definitely not ask you for help. Carol sneered, greeted Fury, and the two left quickly. Clark didn't stop them either, but smiled and watched them walk away. Oh, I actually believed it. Clark said in his heart. Carol is simple-minded and easily deceived. How did Fury, a sinister and cunning guy, believe it so easily? Or is this black egg actually acting? Whether he acted or not, anyway, my real purpose, he can never guess. Clark does this just to get the reward for destroying points. Fury could have guessed unless he knew the existence of his system. As for what Clark said just now, what technology of the Kree Empire? That thing, what is he coming? Study it yourself slowly. With that time, it's better to bask in the sun more. As for the cosmic cube that will appear later, Clark was slightly interested. But only to see if I can use it to get some destruction points. As for the cosmic cube itself, or maybe it's a hidden space gem inside. Clark wasn't really very interested. First, he couldn't use it if he got it. He is not Thanos, and people have Infinity Gauntlet. He's not Tony either. Stark's guy, people directly created a mechanical version of the Infinity Gauntlet. Even if the space gem is given to Clark, he will not be useful. Even if you have the intention to study and use. That is not something that can be done in a short period of time. So, even if the space gem is in Clark's hands, all he thinks about is how to hide it so that everyone can't find it. Wouldn't that mean completely changing the future of the entire Marvel Cinematic Universe? Without space gems, how does Thanos snap his fingers? Thanos doesn't snap his fingers, where does the endgame come from? However, the setting of the Marvel Cinematic Universe seems to be a fact that the future has become an established fact, Even if the past changes, it will only produce a new timeline. Clark touched his chin and thought. Forget it, it's useless to think so much now. After standing there and thinking for a while, Clark gave up this waste of brain cells. There is really limited information available. Thinking blindly by yourself may just be constantly deviating from the facts. Instead of that, it is better to act. He heard that Carol and Fury were about to run. By the way, what about the yuan-devouring beast? Clark looked around. Nothing found. Maybe ran away with Carol. After all, old acquaintances. Speaking of which, this yuan-eater beast is also interesting. After Moel's death, he probably stayed at the air base for 6 years. Haven't eaten anyone in 6 years. So kind to humans. But why did you blind Fury's eyes later? Clark didn't think that Fury at that time was changed by the Skuru. After all, it didn't make sense. Is it really just because petting cats is not standardized? Or did you eat a few Krees in front and cause a ferocious outbreak? In the hangar, a jet aircraft is taking off. Behind is a group of soldiers chasing, but how can 2 legs catch up with people's planes? I can only watch the other party go away angrily. Bang. Status micro shock. A figure jumped directly from the platform above. Do any of you fly an airplane? Clark asked the soldiers in front of him. No one answered. Others shot at him. Clark was a little annoyed. I'm asking you in a good voice. Syllable. On the distant wall, there is an additional mosaic painting. I ask again, does anyone fly a plane? Clark repeated. No one shots were fired, everyone was running. Clark shook his head. It's uncomfortable. He caught up with a soldier behind him and grabbed him. Can you fly an airplane? The soldiers screamed in fright. Clark had little patience and slammed him against the wall. He grabbed another one and repeated the question he had just asked. This time I finally calmed down a lot. Hearing Clark's question, he nodded repeatedly, afraid that he would become a third oil painting. Look, it's good to answer the question well, take it easy, I don't eat people. Clark put the other person down, sorted out his clothes for him, and had a kind smile on his face. But the other party was still so frightened that he couldn't even say anything. Let's go, find one you like. The soldier nodded repeatedly, quickly found a plane and climbed into the cockpit. Clark sat in the co-pilot. Go, keep up with the plane running ahead. Clark smiled and looked at him, you should be able to keep up, right? Quote. The soldier nodded quickly. Yes, there are positioning devices on it. Then don't go yet. Clark glared. The soldier was frightened for a while, and finally started the plane. At this time, the sunlight shone on Clark's body through the windshield, and the warm, full cells were breathing, as if cheering. Clark felt his eyes get a little hot. He reached out and touched it. So soon, he said in his heart. I originally thought that I would have to wait 10 days and a half month. I think it's because of the previous edition. The unlocking degree has increased by a few tenths of a %, and it really becomes different. Open the rear cabin. Clark commanded to the soldiers. The soldier nodded, immediately operated, and opened the rear hatch of the plane. The plane that has just taken off is not fast yet. Clark stood by the rear hatch and looked down at the mountain below. The crimson light on his eyes continued to converge, and after a few seconds of preparation, 2 thumb-thick heat rays were released from his eyes. The rays swept across and cut across the mountain below. There was a loud rumble, and the entire mountain was collapsing. 10 seconds later, the crimson light in Clark's eyes faded, and he felt a slight sense of exhaustion in his body, but after being illuminated by the sun, this fatigue was instantly swept away. Yes, close the hatch. Clark returned to the co-pilot and sat down. The soldier on the main pilot turned pale, and beads of sweat slipped down his cheeks one by one. Hearing Clark's order, he hurriedly closed the hatch. Don't be nervous, as long as you are obedient, I won't hurt you. Clark reached out and pressed his hand on the soldier's shoulder, feeling the other party's body tense for a moment, and he smiled, looking kind. The soldier smiled dryly and nodded. Don't dare to ask if this is true, or is it just lying to him? He didn't want to die, let alone be buried alive. So he could only believe what Clark said. Expect this demon to give himself a way to live. At this time, Clark also received a new point arrival reminder. Destroy large air bases, destroy important military facilities, cause a large number of casualties, damage points plus 10000. Closing square bracket. Not bad. Single quote. Clark muttered inwardly. Massachusetts. 4:32 p.m. Yes, I'm not going back tonight and staying at Kyle's. Okay, I'll take care of myself. Don't worry, Lisa, I'll be home tomorrow for dinner. Well, that's it, bye. Hanging up the phone, Clark casually splattered the sparks pinched by the phone, turned into a pile of debris, and then walked towards a log cabin outside the woods in front of him. Behind him, a plane was parked in the clearing. There was also a corpse lying in the main pilot's seat on the plane. Die with a grievance or everlasting regret. Click. The door opens. Clark walked into the house and saw a crowd of people. It looks hilarious. He walked up and looked at the screw in a suit. It's ugly. The other party's face sank, but there was no seizure. What are you doing here? Carol looked at him with a frown. His arrival was clearly not welcome. Don't get too excited, I'm just ready to wait for you to come and ask me for help. Clark sat down in a chair and looked at the black girl. Hello. He said hello. The other party nodded, and then looked at Carol suspiciously. He's not a good guy. Carol said. The black girl understood, and the eyes that looked at Clark were no longer friendly. Where are you going? Have you heard the recording in the black box? Clark asked. I'm really going. Carol frowned and said, why do you seem to know everything? Quote. Clark laughed. He pointed to his brain. Because I'm smart. Then you really are not modest at all. Fury sneered. He didn't have the slightest affection for Hydra's people. I've always been very clear about myself. Clark said and waved his hand. Go ahead, go listen to the recording, and let your scientists modify the plane outside. Quote. Talos frowned. Although he didn't have such a thing as eyebrows, he did have this movement. Why did we modify that plane? Because you're going to space. Clark looked like a matter of course, followed by an impatient wave of his hand again and said, go ahead, you will know after listening to the recording, don't keep asking me, you have to learn to find the answer yourself. Quote. Everyone. We didn't ask you either, you yourself came in and said something good or not. Leave him alone. Carol said and took the lead and walked outside. Others hurried to follow. Fury glanced back at Clark as he left. When everyone was gone, Clark went to the kitchen to get a drink. When he finished drinking, they all returned. Clark didn't know what they were discussing over there, but the four men stared at him as soon as they entered. What's wrong? Clark asked. What else do you know? Carol pulled over a chair and sat down across from him. You want to know this time? Clark looked at her with a smile. Carol nodded unabashedly. They had just finished listening to the recording in the black box, and they also knew that the location of Moel's laboratory was indeed in space. Then several people discussed it and felt the need to get some more useful information from Clark's mouth. Although Fury stressed that this guy is not a good person, he definitely has bad intentions. But at least what Clark said so far has become a reality. Destroy the plot chain, cause a mild impact on the plot, destroy points plus 30000. Closing square bracket. Hear the prompts in your head. Clark's smile widened. Okay, since you have asked sincerely, then I will tell you mercifully. Clark sat up straight. Next, you are going to space to find Moel's laboratory, which is not a laboratory, but should be called some kind of refuge. Clark said and looked at Taros, pointed at him and said, his wife and children are up there, and they have been sleepy for many years. Quote. After finding the laboratory, you will find the energy core. In fact, it is the cosmic cube, with unlimited energy. You should know very well about that, Fury, right? Clark smiled and looked at Fury. Fury darkened and looked at him. That's your Hydra's secret weapon, isn't it? Clark snapped his fingers, nodded with a smile and said, that's right, that used to be our Hydra's secret weapon. The Red Skull used it to make weapons, almost ruled the world, but unfortunately it was destroyed by Captain America. Quote. To be honest, the Red Skull guy is really useless, and he was defeated by a soldier. Are you Hydra all laughing at your former leader like you? Fury asked. No, you're wrong. Clark shook his head and said, the Red Skull is the Red Skull, the Hydra is the Hydra, he can't represent all the Hydras, at best, it's just one of the heads. Quote. So you're the other head. Are you paraphrasing me? Clark smiled and said, but it's no secret, you're right, we are indeed another head, and there are many like us, so if you prepare to deal with Hydra in the future, remember that when you think you have defeated them, you just cut off a head. Quote. Fury fell silent and did not pursue any further questions. He has already got the information he wants and will need a while to digest. To the point, that's not what I want to hear. Carol said. Clark nodded and said, no problem, I'll just answer Fury's question, after all, we are old acquaintances. Quote. Fury shrugged and was noncommittal. Just speaking of the cosmic cube, that thing is known as infinite energy, which can be used as an energy source for the light speed engine. Clark suddenly smiled and pointed at Carol. And you, it is also because you absorbed the energy of the cosmic cube that you have these abilities now. Of course, the abilities you have do not stop there, but you have not yet excavated them. Quote. What abilities do I have myself? I myself will not know. Carol did not approve of Clark's remarks. Really? Clark smiled and pointed to the back of her neck. What about this thing? If I'm not mistaken, it's not an earring or a necklace. Quote. That's to control my emotions so that I don't get out of control. Carol explained. Out of control. Clark amused, who is going to lose control? You. Or the one who put this thing on you? Quote. No kidding. This is a collar, just like those cats and dogs on the road. The owner wears it for pets in order to control them. Have you ever seen animals in the wild wear collars? Clark's words made Carol's face look ugly. She reached out and ruffled her hair, touching the circular device on the back of her neck. Carol, black girl stopped talking. Carol shook her head slightly at her, signaling that she was fine. Come, Taros, tell this naive little girl what this thing is. Clark lifted Erlang's leg, pointed at Taros, and said. Talos looked over and recognized the thing at a glance. It's a Kree mind control device, but it's scaled down and has some changes, but it should be roughly the same. Talos recognized this thing and said it directly. Carol gritted her teeth and tried to take it off. But the painful teeth grinned. Don't use brute force. Clark said, I'll help you get this thing later, but let's talk about the rest of the things now. Quote. Carol finally let go of her hand this time. If I'm not mistaken, Yang Rogue should already be on his way to Earth by now. Quote. But I didn't tell him I was here. Carol said. Clark smiled and said, you are too naive. This is not a question of whether you say or not, but whether he wants to know or not. You think your clothes are just good to wear. Quote. What do you mean? Carol frowned. Do you understand positioning? Clark said, you're not one of those people you can trust, and you don't think they're going to do anything with your combat uniform. Quote. It's a big possibility. Talos nodded and said. He had seen the meanness of the Krees, so he was willing to speculate on the guys with the greatest malice. It's too pediatric to position a combat suit or something. It's nothing at all. So, we're running out of time. Fury turned to Carol and asked, how much time do you think it will take for them to come to Earth? Quote. It won't take more than 24 hours. Carol sighed and said, if they had really located my coordinates in the first place, it might have been almost there by now. Quote. Take it easy. Clark saw the nervous look on their faces. Even if they come, they are only the vanguard, just a few people, so easy to solve. Quote. The real trouble is the support troops that come later. I think Ronan the Accuser should be happy to come and destroy such a beautiful planet. Don't forget that you are also an Earthling. Fury said in a deep voice. Of course, or I wouldn't be here to tell you that. Clark said, well, now you know what you're going to do, so what's your plan? Quote. No matter what, you have to find Moel's laboratory first. Taros said. After you find it, you will evacuate with people first. Carol said to him, this happened because of me, you are all victims, there is no need to continue to endure this. Quote. Don't forget me. Fury said, I don't want to wake up the next day, it's all in ruins, this is my home, it's not a place where these guys can mess around. Quote. Fury, Earth's technology is too backward. Carol shook her head and said, if it's really Ronan the Accuser, none of you can help. Quote. Carol's words were direct and a little hurtful. But at this time, she obviously can't explain it all in a more euphemistic way. She didn't want more innocent people to make senseless sacrifices. Is it so sensational? Clark deliberately wiped the corners of his eyes. There were no tears. Okay, you don't think Carol can't deal with the Kree, do you? Earthlings, you don't understand the horror of the Kree at all. Talos obviously disliked Clark's attitude. You haven't seen their brutality with your own eyes and will never understand. Quote. How do you know I haven't seen it? Clark looked at him and said. Talos was a little creepy by Clark, and after a moment he looked away from his heart. Okay. Clark slapped the table and stood up. Let's go. He said to Carol. Where to? What to do? Carol asked with a puzzled look. Of course, to help you tap into your true power. Clark took a few steps forward, suddenly stopped again, looked back at her and asked, by the way, I helped you so much, should you turn against me after it's over? Quote. As long as you're not trying to destroy the world. Carol stood up and said. Then I'm relieved. Clark smiled and greeted the others. Come on, you can all come and see, after all, this is not often seen. Quote. Everyone came outside. There is a large open space outside Heime's house. Clark let everyone else watch from the outside, and then he took Carol to the center of the field. Is it time for you to tell me what you're going to do? Carol said. Okay. Clark replied with a smile, then punched Carol in the face. Carol's whole person flew out more than 10 meters upside down and rolled down on the grass. Hey! What are you doing? Heime was excited to rush forward. But was pulled by Fury. Don't get excited, I think I know what he's going to do. Fury pulled her and said. Heime was just about to curse with excitement. As a result, Carol, who was knocked to the ground over there, got up directly, and a punch blasted out an energy beam and slammed into Clark on the opposite side. Boom! The energy beam tore through the turf, leaving a scorched black mark several meters long. But did not hit Clark. Your reaction is too slow. Clark appeared in front of Carol, and the distance between the two was even less than 2 centimeters. He grabbed Carol's face and smashed it to the ground. Boom! The ground was immediately smashed out of a deep pit. Carol snorted, feeling that the whole person was stunned, everything seemed to be spinning, and her ability to even think became dull. Clark, on the other hand, had no intention of stopping. He directly grabbed one of Carol's legs, flicked it sharply, clicked, and a large tree 20 or 30 meters away was broken on the spot by Carol, who flew out. Bang! Clark simply jumped, fell in front of Carol. Bending down to grab her, she jerked her into the air. Bang! He bounced up, caught up with Carol in midair, and slammed a punch into her face. Bang! The turf flew and the dirt splashed and spilled. In a pit 3 or 4 meters in diameter in the center, Carol lay there motionless with a bloody face. Bang! Clark landed on the ground, walked over and slammed his fist down. Boom! This punch failed to hit Carol's body. Caught by one hand. In the pit, Carol, who had just passed out, had opened her eyes at this time, and there was golden energy all over her body, even her eyes were shrouded in energy, and she could only see 2 bright lights. Huh, I thought it would be a little longer. Clark said with a smile. In the next second, an energy slammed into his chest. Blasted his whole person into the air hundreds of meters. Bang! Carol in the pit soared into the sky, caught up with Clark, and slammed a punch into his face. Clark put his hands up in front of him. Click! The bone of the arm is directly broken. The body slammed into the ground like a cannonball. Bang! There was another deep pit in the ground. Hiss! Okay, Carol, you don't talk a word. Quote. Clark grumbled as he got up from the pit. The broken arm bones have been restored in this moment. Bang! The golden figure fell in front of him. Clark quickly stretched out his hand and shouted, Hey! That's it, it's over. Quote. He didn't want to get beaten up again. Carol stopped as soon as she took a step forward, her brow furrowed and then let go. I just punched you back. She said. But your punch directly broke 2 of my bones. Clark said, and I'm helping you. Quote. Carol was silent. A moment later, the golden energy on her body slowly disappeared. Back to normal. She touched the back of her neck, and the circular device was gone, and it was directly burned to ashes by the energy that had just erupted in her body. That's what you say, my true power. She looked at her hands and looked up to ask Clark. Yes, how does it feel? Clark asked with a smile. At this time, others also ran over. Heime looked Carol up and down and asked, Are you all right? Just now you. It's okay, I feel better than ever. Carol said with a smile. That's what you say. Fury looked at Clark as if he knew him for the first time. Pretty effective, isn't it? Clark said, This energy in Carol's body has always existed and is protecting her, so as long as she encounters a life and death crisis, it will naturally erupt. Quote. Of course, a strong enough will can too. But Clark felt it was more direct and straightforward. And, it's cool to be able to beat Captain Marvel in advance. This is your real strength? Fury asked. You guess. Fury was lost in thought. At night, Talos techies were working overtime to modify the plane so it could fly in space. Everyone else didn't rest either. Help the help, watch the lively see the lively. Clark sat on the roof, watching the busy few people over there. Under the eaves, Carol is consulting the little black girl to change the color of her combat uniform. Clark overheard the conversation between the two. After a moment, Carol also came to the roof and sat down next to Clark. Are you going to go with you too? Carol asked him. I thought we were comrades now. Clark said, for the planet, isn't it? Quote. Carol nodded and continued to ask without persistence. She is not Fury, her prejudice against Hydra is not so deep, plus Clark has helped her before, although she does not like Clark's style of doing things, she is willing to accept such a comrade in arms. Actually, I can fly up alone and find that lab. Carol raised her head and looked at the sky. You will frighten those Skurrus, they will not trust a person in a Kree combat uniform. Clark said and looked at her, well, even if you change colors, it's the same. Quote. So I gave up. Carol said, but I'll stop Yang. Rogue them. Quote. Can you get your hands on it? Clark asked her. Carol nodded. Of course. Want me to help? Do you think I need it? Carol's hand lit up. Well, you're awesome, you can do it alone. Clark shrugged and said. After this is over, I plan to send Talos and them to find the other clansmen. Carol voiced her thoughts. I know it will take a while, but I feel that it is my obligation. Quote. Will you come back? Clark asked her. Carol nodded. I'll come back after helping Talos find his people. This answer surprised Clark a little. Originally Captain Marvel, but she didn't hurry back until Fury contacted her. I thought you would use this power to protect the peace of the universe. Clark said, don't you have that idea? Quote. Yes, but I have people here who are important to me. Carol looked over at the hangar with a smile on her face. Is it Black Girl? Clark followed her gaze, but was dumbfounded. What the heck? Is it Fury? Wait a minute. The two of them shouldn't. Oh, my god. I thought you two were just friends. Clark said in surprise. Carol smiled and said, the other person is very good, but you are right, we are really just friends now. Quote. That said, it's not yet certain. But I already have this idea in my mind. Awesome, my stewed egg. Unexpectedly hooked, attracted Captain Marvel. This is probably the pinnacle of brine eggs, right? At this time, Clark's mind also sounded the system's prompt. Destroy the original plot chain, destroy the emotional line of Captain Marvel, have a profound impact on the subsequent plot, destroy the points plus 150,000. Closing square bracket. Hiss. Clark couldn't help but gasp. He counted carefully. Indeed, 5 followed by 4 zeros. A full 150,000 destruction points. Simply terrible. What's wrong with you? Carol looked at him and asked. No, nothing. Clark shook his head. Of course he wouldn't say, because one of your decisions has benefited me tremendously. Even if he did, Carol probably couldn't understand what he was saying. Carol did not delve into it, stood up and said, no matter what, as long as you don't do bad things in the future, we will still be friends. Quote. She nodded at Clark, jumped off, and returned below. At this time, Clark was a little troubled. 150,000 destruction points is certainly a great thing. But Captain Marvel wants to stay on Earth, which is also a big trouble for him. And, even the system said that this will have a profound impact on the subsequent plot. Clark wondered to what extent this impact would be. Shouldn't it directly make the subsequent plot unrecognizable? Probably not. If that's the case, it can't be just 150,000, at least 10 or 20 million, right? Forget it, the boat is naturally straight to the bridge, it's useless to think so much now, not to mention that she doesn't have to help the Skurru people to find other tribesmen. Clark thought to himself, maybe this process will take a dozen or 20 years. Quote. The subsequent plot, that is, the Millennium, Tony Stark teased Killian, the guy who would come up with the desperate virus later. Then in '05, the Hulk was born. But neither the former, nor the latter. In fact, the movement caused is not particularly large. The Hulk will return to the United States in the next 10 years before making a bigger move. And the real plot is probably the birth of Iron Man in '09. It's still 14 years away. Perhaps, Captain Marvel hadn't returned from the universe at that time. In fact, it was not until the birth of Iron Man that it was the origin of a large number of subsequent plots that officially unfolded. For example, the second plot of Iron Man in 10 years, the plot of Thor in 10 years, and the Hulk vs. Abomination plot in 10 years. It can be said that 10 years of plot is really much. Then there was a 2-year silence, and 12 years before the plot of the first Avengers part. New Covenant Jihad. Defend your homeland and fight against an alien invasion. And it is estimated that by that time, Clark's strength is already strong enough. When Captain Marvel comes back again, even if it will cause him some trouble, it will be limited. In this way, it is actually nothing. When Clark thought about it, it seemed that this was really the case. As long as your strength is strong enough, what is the slight change in the plot? But should I get a team of super criminals in the future? Clark thought to himself. He always thought that his previous idea of creating Hydra was very good. Let a group of younger brothers work for him, and he could lie down and earn points. And that's just a bunch of kids. In the future, his Hydra will definitely grow one after another. At that time, the point income that will bring him will only be more. But if you get another team of super criminals out and fight with the Avengers in the future or something, wouldn't it be another extra income? It's funny just thinking about it. Forget it, we'll talk about this later, add more now. Clark called up his character panel. The mind turns into a finger and clicks wildly on the plus sign behind the Kryptonian template. A moment later. Name: Clark. Week: Kent. Gender: male. Age 9 5800. Wolverine self-healing ability increased plus Kryptonian template boost. Already owned template. Kryptonian template 2.89%. Existing abilities. Magic resistance passive from Kryptonian template. Unlockable ability Man of Steel passive from Kryptonian template. Heat Ray active from Kryptonian template. Perspective active from Kryptonian template. Super Hearing passive from Kryptonian template. Bioforce field active from Kryptonian template. Stellar Energy passive from Kryptonian template. Overdrive self-healing passive. Wolverine version. Magic transformation active. Demon Woman version. Destruction points 350 points. The unlocking degree of the template suddenly increased to nearly 3%. If it weren't for the fact that it was night, Clark felt like the cells in his body would revel together. The lifespan has increased to 5,800 years, and it will definitely increase in the future, and Kryptonians theoretically, in fact, there is no lifespan limit. You know, in the comics, Superman slept in the core of the sun for tens of thousands of years, and then woke up and directly became a golden Superman, not to mention a batch of terrifying strength, but also has an almost eternal life. And Clark's current lifespan of thousands of years is actually nothing. Early in the morning, the modification of the aircraft was completed. Originally, at this time, Taros would let his subordinates turn into Carol's appearance and wait for the arrival of Rogue. But in Clark's view, this is not necessary at all. You guys can't fool you anyway. Rogue. A life was sacrificed in vain. And now, Carol, who has awakened his strength in advance, is naturally not afraid of courage at all. Rogue their arrival. Nor will he propose to cheat each other, delay time or anything. The group all set off, except for the little black sister who was left by the black sister and placed in the relatives' house. Even the Yuan Eater Gu was taken on the plane. Clark naturally got on the plane as well. He can't fly yet. However, surviving in a vacuum is not a problem for him. Carol enters binary star form and flies on the periphery of the aircraft. The one who controls the plane is the black girl. Fury sits in the passenger seat, looking at Carol outside through the glass, with a look of envy and amazement, and at the same time a deep sense of pride in his eyes. Can you fly? He turned back to Clark in the back row. Clark chuckled and ignored him. The future S.H.I.E.L.D. director is quite funny when he is young. Seeing Clark ignore himself, Fury smiled and turned back triumphantly. This sour smell of love. Single quote. Clark said in his heart. Don't think he didn't see it. Last night, These two guys secretly went for a tryst in the woods. God knows what the two of them said there. After coming back, Fury, this guy is a little weird. It turns out that the future king of agents will inevitably be affected by love, hee hee. When the plane leaves the atmosphere and goes into space, the weightlessness caused many objects in the aircraft to float. Gu also floated in the air, opening his teeth and dancing his claws, looking panicked. Fury, a cat lover, quickly grabbed it so that it would fall out of midair and be injured after getting out of weightlessness for a while. It would be interesting if Fury was swallowed by this yuan-devouring beast now. Clark looked at this scene and thought maliciously. However, Gu is obviously not interested in the ration in front of him, and did not mean to open his mouth to eat. The location of the coordinates is here. Heimei looked around. Strange, why is there nothing? Are the coordinates determined? Taros quickly asked. Heimei nodded and confirmed again, there was no mistake. That's right, this is it. At this time, Carol outside came over and knocked on the glass, pointed to the void in front of him, and then reached out and operated on the controller of his wrist. With a burst of streamers streaking by. It's like a famous painter's brush. A spaceship with a large size was drawn in the void. This is it. Talos shouted excitedly. The thought of meeting his wife and children soon made him feel a little excited. Outside, Carol beckoned at them and flew ahead first. This is Dr. Marwell's lab. Disembarking from the plane, Heimei looked around and let out an exclamation in her mouth. Let's go to the control room. Carol came over and greeted everyone. What are you staring at me for? Clark fell behind the line, looking speechlessly at Fury, who had been staring at him. It's nothing, aren't we old acquaintances, do you want to talk? The word old acquaintance was a joke made by Clark before, but he didn't expect it to be returned to him by Fury now. Do we have anything to talk about? Clark asked him, or are you going to join Hydra? If that is the case, I can welcome you on behalf of the organization. Quote. Why do you know so much? Fury ignored Clark's joke with a serious expression. Tarot card divination, crystal ball prophecy, you should have heard of this, right? You want to say, you will prophesy. Fury had a visibly incredulous look on his face. Yes, I'm the epitome of that. Clark laughs, I had a hunch of something that was going to happen, so I approached Carol and wanted to use her power to turn it around. Quote. You think I'll believe it? Fury stared at him. Clark also looked at him with a smile. Then do you think I will care if you believe it or not? Believe it or not? Clark turned his head and walked to the front. Is it true? Fury stared at Clark's back, thinking to himself. People like him like to think too much. Many concerns, many ideas. If Clark had to pull him and explain it to him, Fury might not believe it. But now, like Clark, he didn't bother to explain to him, and he didn't believe it or not, but it made Fury hesitate. Spaceship, main control room. The group arrived here. There are really a lot of things here, all kinds of things, everything. It's not even a bit like a main control room. Instead, it's like an activity room for some community. Over there, there's a game console. The coffee is still hot, and someone should be here just now. Clark glanced at the cup of coffee on the table, walked to the other side, and grabbed the Ku who was facing the cosmic cube with a curious look on his paw. The little one also looked unhappy and danced his claws at him. Don't try to scratch my eyes. Clark said something to it, dropping it on the ground. Taros, you go and call them out. Carol ordered to Taros, then also walked to this side, glanced at Clark, and said, this is the cosmic cube, is your purpose for it? Quote. What if I say yes? Clark looked at her. I can't give it to you. Carol also looked at him, and the atmosphere was a little tense for a while. This made the black girl who came over a little unsure of what to do. She is just an ordinary person, and the two in front of her are monsters that can easily tear ordinary people apart. For a moment. Okay, I just want to hide it. Clark said, it's too dangerous to continue to exist in this world. Quote. I can take it away. Carol said, take it somewhere deserted and bury it. Quote. No, you'll still be found, trust me, it's not difficult. Clark said, the best thing to do is to hide it somewhere where no one can go. I have an idea, I need your help later. Quote. Tell me about it. Wait a minute, take it down first. Clark said. But he didn't reach for it. He knew that this thing had a dark history of teleporting people away, and Clark couldn't guarantee that when he touched it, it would suddenly go crazy and teleport himself somewhere. So, the job is better given to Carol. Come on, put it here. Clark brought a box over. You don't seem to want to touch it. Carol said, reaching out and taking the cosmic cube off and putting it in the box that Clark had taken. If you knew the black history of this thing, you might be like me. Clark said, closing the lid of the box. When he got the cosmic cube, he didn't hear any hints from the system. Obviously, the system does not have any incentives in this regard. And when he saw the cosmic cube, Clark didn't have any special feelings. He had also wondered before whether his Kryptonian template could absorb the energy of this space gem. Now it seems that it really cannot. Treadmill. A sound of footsteps approached from outside the passage. Soon, a group of people appeared in Clark's field of vision. These are the Skuru refugees. Fury looked at them and said, it looks like all are civilians. Quote. Carol nodded, her face ugly. She was once brainwashed by the Kree and determined to destroy the evil Skuru and bring peace to the universe. But when the cruel truth lay out before her, she knew who was the evil party. Clark saw her face and felt unimpressed. The Kree is the winner, chasing down the Skuru who posed a threat to them. In Clark's view, there is nothing wrong with that. If it were him, he would also be killed. But his ideas don't speak for everyone. At least for people like Carol, who have justice and good intentions, they will certainly not agree. Nor did Clark try to reverse Carol's thinking. Not a child again. So easy to fool. They are all adults and their minds are mature. No one will easily agree with someone else's ideas. Not to mention, it is still contrary to the idea. However, although Clark agreed with the Kree's approach, this did not mean that he wanted to be friends with the Kree. On the contrary, if possible, Clark was happy to help destroy the Kree Empire. I believe that it will be a huge amount of sabotage point income. Just when Talos was reuniting with his wife and children, and he was beautiful. Clark suddenly heard several unfamiliar voices appear in the spaceship. Attention, the Kree are coming. He reminded others. When Carol heard this, her face turned grim, and her eyes looked at the entrance of the passage over there. You take it, give it to me after the fight. Clark threw the box in his hand to Fury. Let him keep it. After all, when the fight starts, he doesn't want to carry this burden. Fury took the box, a little surprised. He had seen Clark holding the box all the time, thinking that he was trying to steal the cosmic cube. As a result, he now has lost this thing to himself. This made Fury a little confused about his thoughts. Are there weapons on this ship? May asked the wife of Taros. The latter shook his head. The ship exists as a laboratory, so it really doesn't have any weapons on it. The spacecraft itself has a weapon configuration, but it is a huge energy cannon. Even if it is removed and can be used, no one present except Clark and Carol can hold that thing. Then you guys retreat to the back first. May was a little disappointed. Without a weapon, she couldn't help. As for the small pistol in her hand, she didn't think this thing could hurt the heavily armed aliens. Don't worry, leave it to them, they can handle it. Fury patted Black Sister's shoulder and comforted. As a combatant, it's frustrating not being able to help in combat. Here it is. Clark reminded. Really? The next moment a group of heavily armed Kree, just under the Kree commander Yang. Rogue walked in under the lead. Close to the enemy, Firth, you make me too much. Bang. Brave. Before Rogue finished speaking, he was blasted out by an annoyed Carol with an energy beam. This is not light. Even if brave. Rogue was wearing a highly defensive combat suit, and his internal organs were also hit with a burst of colic, and blue blood dripped from the corners of his mouth. For a while, it was difficult to get up from the ground. Sir, are you all right? A Kree warrior stepped forward to help him, but was brave. Rogue reached out and pushed away. With a gloomy face, he got up from the ground with a fierce look in his eyes. Looks like you already know that. Carol's face was equally gloomy. You deceived me and made me a compliant. Huh. Clark couldn't help but look at her. Does Captain Marvel also use idioms? I gave you a new life. Brave. Rogue said loudly. And you, but you don't know how to be grateful. Quote. Why do you sound resentful? Clark said to Carol, hey. This one who takes the lead is given to you, and the rest belongs to me. Quote. No, Those few minions belong to you, and the rest are mine. After Carol finished speaking, the people had already rushed forward. Okay, the creeps come here. Clark beckoned to several Kree warriors. As a result, they ignored him and shot Carol instead. Am I being ignored? Clark smiled, and the next moment the person had disappeared in place and appeared in front of a Kree warrior. What? As soon as he saw it, a man appeared in front of him, but he startled the Kree warrior. However, after a moment of panic, his qualities as a warrior immediately made him ready to turn his muzzle and attack. Slowly. Bang. Blue, green, splashed everywhere. Clark wasn't Carol. He will kill when he strikes. Knowing that people's armor is very strong, you still scare people, isn't that a lack of heart? Clark directly slapped the other party's head. The headless corpse flew out and crashed into the wall of the spaceship. Carla. Another Kree warrior shouted angrily. Oh, looks like you have a good relationship. Quote. Clark smiled. Taking a step in an instant, the whole person directly crossed a distance of 5 or 6 meters and appeared in front of the other party. Then go and accompany her. Bang. Another dead one. These ordinary Kree warriors are several times stronger in physical fitness than the Earthlings. But compared to Clark, there is no comparison between the two at all. 4 Kree warriors, Clark easily got it all. The whole process took no more than half a minute. After doing all this, he turned his head and looked. It was discovered that Carol had just solved 2 opponents. And those 2 guys didn't die at all, they just lost their combat effectiveness. Hey, do you want to help? Quote. Clark shouted over there. Carol grabbed a handful of strong energy in one hand, let the energy of the muzzle bombard her palm, did not even wrinkle her brows, directly punched the other party's eyebrows crookedly, originally quite beautiful face, directly did not look. No need. Carol turned around and said. People say no need, Clark naturally won't make fun of himself. He walked to the other side and reached for the small box Fury was holding in his hand. Wait a minute, Carol has to play a little longer. Clark sat down and said. The black girl next to him subconsciously moved away from him. The Skuru looked at him with fear. Anyone who sees someone slap several people's heads with their own eyes will also be terrified. Although Clark seemed to be on their side. But that still didn't prevent them from fearing Clark. In this regard, Clark saw it in his eyes and did not care at all. Fear is a good emotion. Clark would rather have more people fear themselves than respect and love. After all, the former really takes too much energy. People's ideas are very complicated. How many things do you have to do to make others respect and love you? Instead, it's easier to be scared. As long as you are strong enough and the means are brutal enough. People are naturally afraid of you. Compared to other people, Fury didn't feel that way. He has also been to the battlefield and is accustomed to seeing people who live and die. He had seen more brutal images than this. However, in the bottom of his heart, Fury also sighed. This guy in front of him is worthy of being Hydra's secret weapon, the style of doing things, quite a Hydra. Of course, in some places, there were some differences from the Hydra he was familiar with. But in essence, they are all egoists. What is not good for yourself, you will definitely not do. A few minutes later, Carol's side is finally over. Several people lay on the ground, including Yang. Rogue, except for the female warrior, who seemed to be dying, the others were still alive, but they had lost their combat effectiveness. Still relented. Clark commented in his heart. He was amused by Carol's senseless kindness, but did not correct it. People are superheroes of justice. And what about him? He is the leader of Hydra. It's the villain. It's evil. Let a villain be evil to correct the benevolent behavior of superheroes. Clark's brain isn't broken yet. What are you going to do with these guys? Clark pointed to the men on the ground and asked Carol. They will bring the news from here back to the Kree Empire, and if the Kree Empire wants revenge, they are always welcome to come to me. Carol looked back, her gaze on Yang. Rogue's body paused for a moment. What are you going to do with this thing? Carol pointed to the box in Clark's hand. I'm going to. Clark was just about to say something, but suddenly sensed something and looked back in the direction behind him. What's wrong? Carol asked him. High energy reaction. Clark said, if I'm not mistaken, it should be Ronin. Quote. I'll take a look. Carol said. Well, we have only you here capable of dealing with Ronin's fleet. Clark nodded. This kind of thing is left to Carol. As for himself, although he also wants to earn another destruction point, but his ability is limited, he can only give up. When Carol left, Clark pointed to Yang. Rogue people. Collect their weapons or something. He said to Talos. Talos nodded and stepped forward with a few clansmen to collect their weapons. Can this thing be opened? Clark knocked on the metal layer in front of him and asked the screw. I'll do it. Taro's wife stood up, walked to the control panel on the side, and pressed a few buttons. Thanks for watching.